Let's bring in the MPs who represent their parties on military matters. Conservative MP James Bezan is Parliamentary Secretary of National Defence. NDP MP Matthew Callaway is a former critic of military procurement. He's in Toronto. Joyce Murray is Liberal defence critic. She joins us from Vancouver. Welcome to you all. James, I want to go to you first. Is there a legitimate criticism that the government hasn't done enough to identify and help these veterans and soldiers get through a very traumatic situation?
Well, I think, first of all, I think all of us want to express our condolences and sympathies to the families that have been infected with the tragedies that have occurred this week. Right. Any death by suicide in our military family, or any suicide for that matter, is really unfortunate. So we want to reach out to those families and ensure that we're there for them, and that Veterans Affairs and Department of National Defence, Canadian Armed Forces, we're all one big one family, and they're there to assist. So we have been addressing this since we came to office. We've went and increased health care funding by over $100 million, so it's now over $420 million a year. $50 million of that, as Richard already alluded to, is dedicated to mental health, and we've almost doubled the number of mental health workers in the armed forces. There definitely is always a need for more, and we are competitively out there in the market trying to get more psychiatrists, more therapists, more psychologists to help with our returning vets, because they deserve to get all the support that we can give them.
Matthew, short of putting a psychologist in every veteran's or soldier's house, can you put enough resources into it? Is it possible to do enough?
Well, first, Don, thanks for having me, and let me follow James by sending out condolences to the families of Warrant Officer McNeil and Master Corporal Elliott and Master Bombardier Halmrast from me and Tom and all our NDP caucus. I think, and I heard James talk about this, I heard the minister talk about it in the House. They talk about throwing resources, money at this problem, and I don't think that's the issue. The issue is to ensure that you're putting in place relevant, effective, efficient resources to prevent suicides. And Don, where that fails, as in the case 3 times this week, then we need a system in place to ensure that we can identify where that failing is. And at this point in time, it's not clear that we have that system. We have 50 outstanding Board of Inquiries on soldier suicides. And we also, though, have 19 or so, 20 Board of Inquiry reports that have been returned. It's not clear. We haven't heard from the government what those say and what direction they point us to in trying to resolve this problem. But clearly, there's a problem that this government has in preventing suicide, and that should be our focus.
Joyce, Matthew pointed out that there are 50 inquiries still in progress. I counted also 70. I heard it was 70. But is this where the problem lies, or where do you see the government having to move faster to try and deal with something that's completely unacceptable, I think, to most Canadians?
Well, there's definitely more to be done, Don, and I want to also take a moment to express my deepest sympathy on behalf of the Liberals to the family members affected. It's a matter of resources, so I would disagree with Matthew that there's enough, and it's a matter of process. And the Ombudsman, the Veterans Ombudsman, Guy Perron...
Joyce, just to be clear, I didn't say that there were enough.
I'll just finish
it's not about throwing money around, is what I said.
Yeah. Yes, so the Veterans Ombudsman, Guy Perron, said that the JPSUs, the support units, are under-resourced by 15 to 22%. And in fact, we have bases like Petawawa where the JPSU is staffed up for supporting 30 people, and they have 200 people who require that support. But here's the key that I would like to mention, and that is the families of the service members who come back. According to the National Defence Ombudsman in a recent report, there are severe stresses on the families that are not adequately addressed. And so when a person is injured in service, that adds stress. Families already deal with a whole range of difficulties when there are for example, single parenting when the partner is overseas on a mission, dealing with the stress of risks to family member, relocations, and so on. So I think having more supports to the family, there's clearly a call for that, and also more medical support for the injured members themselves.
James, are those legitimate observations?
Well, the military ombudsman also said that this government, the Department of National Defense, and the Canadian Armed Forces have made military families a major priority, and that they are getting improved resources than what was there before. You know, the JPSUs, they're right across this country, and they're providing
JPSUs,
the Joint Personnel Support Units.
Exactly.
And they're right across this country in every base where we've been deploying people to Afghanistan, and they're there for supporting the families and the members. Now, we are definitely needing to do more, and we are working at doing more in training so that members of the Canadian Armed Forces can visualize and see for themselves, you know, how to identify when their mental health is starting to deteriorate. We're also taking out the stigma, and this is something that General Lieutenant Tinchuk really focuses his efforts on when he is the Chief of Defense Staff, to make sure that the stigma around mental health issues were negated. And so now it's also important that we continue to provide that services to the family so that they can see if their loved ones are suffering at all. And for those that have PTSD or other operational stress injuries and depression, that we are getting the help to them before we get to such a critical point.
That's the problem, isn't it, Matthew? Making sure that soldiers feel they can come forward and admit something that's not very macho in some cases. I mean, that seems to be, the stigma is very real that James is talking about.
Well, I think it is an issue of stigma, Don, but I think it's also something other than that we need to consider, and it's the universal standard of service that the armed forces apply. And what I think we need to do is understand the particular issue of post-traumatic stress disorder and mental health injuries. And the system we have in place where you return to full universal standard of service within 3 years or you're out is not one that accommodates the nature of this disease for a few reasons. One, because we know that there's sometimes a lag in the manifestation of these issues. And the second thing is it doesn't necessarily ever actually go away, that this is something that soldiers have to live with. So the problem becomes, once you self-identify as a member of our armed forces that you are having these concerns, then automatically you are put on a bit of a ticking clock here about whether you can ever return to full service. So it's not just the stigma, it's, well, what happens to your future in the armed forces? Are you going to be pushed out of the armed forces because you've identified that you have a mental health injury that needs to be dealt with? Are you eligible for your pension by the time you get pushed out? What happens to your family? And so with respect to one of the suicides this week, we heard a friend talk about very real concerns about how that man was going to support himself once he got pushed out of the armed forces.
Quick last word to you, Joyce. I'm out of time here, but what would you like to have done next?
Well, Don, let's recognize that this challenge is only going to grow. The estimate is there will be 3,000 injured forces members injured in Afghanistan that will be identifying their severe PTSD over the coming years. So we need to get ahead of this, not always playing catch up, and we need to put more resources and also new ideas to support these members.
Okay, Joyce Murray, Matthew Callaway, and James Bezan, thank you all. Appreciate you coming in.